A rich, sick man asked a nurse to pretend to be his daughter for a day. Hours later, when his real nephew walked in and saw her face, the entire hospital ward went silent. Sarah Chen's legs ached as she made her final rounds in Central Hospital's VIP wing. 12 hours on her feet. The squeaking of her white sneakers echoed through the empty corridor. 11:45 p.m. 15 minutes left on her shift. "Miss Chen," a raspy voice called from room 2104. Sarah stopped. Charles Montgomery's room. The machines beeped steadily inside. She hadn't planned on checking on him again. He had his call button if he needed anything. "Coming, Mr. Montgomery." She pushed the door open. The room smelled of antiseptic and expensive cologne. Montgomery lay in his adjustable bed, his gray hair messy against the pillow. His private room was 3 times the size of the standard ones, with a leather sofa and a view of the city lights. A half-eaten plate of food sat on his tray. "You should be sleeping," Sarah said, checking his vitals monitor. Montgomery's hands shook as he tried to sit up. "Sleep is for the dead, and I'll be joining them soon enough. Don't talk like that." Sarah adjusted his pillows. His skin felt paper-thin under her hands. "Your numbers are stable. Numbers lie. I can feel it." He grabbed her wrist. His grip was stronger than she expected. "I need to ask you something." Sarah glanced at the door. "Can it wait until morning?" "D.R. Patterson will be doing rounds at..." "No." Montgomery's blue eyes locked onto hers. "It has to be now, before I lose my nerve." Sarah pulled up a chair. The leather squeaked as she sat down. "What is it?" Montgomery's chest rose and fell with labored breaths. "How old are you?" 28. Same age as my Jessica would have been. His voice cracked. Sarah checked his chart. No Jessica listed in his emergency contacts. Only lawyers and business associates. "Your daughter?" Montgomery nodded. He reached for the water glass on his bedside table. His hands trembled too much to grab it. Sarah helped him take a sip. "Car accident. 5 years ago." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I was in Tokyo, closing a deal. Didn't even make it back for the funeral." Sarah's pager buzzed. She ignored it. "I'm sorry. I was always in Tokyo, or London, or Hong Kong." Montgomery's fingers picked at his blanket. "Building my empire while she grew up without a father." Montgomery. "I have money." He grabbed her wrist again. "More than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But I can't buy back a single day with her." Sarah tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "I need you to do something for me," he said. "Something unusual. I should really check on my other patients. I'll pay you. Whatever you want." His voice rose. The heart monitor beeped faster. "Just 1 day. That's all I'm asking." "1 day for what?" Montgomery's eyes welled up. "Pretend to be her. Just for 1 day." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What?" "My lawyer's coming tomorrow. I want to change my will." Montgomery's words tumbled out faster now. "I need him to see, to understand, what kind of father I could have been. That would be completely unethical." Sarah stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. "I could lose my license. Please." Montgomery's voice cracked again. "I'm dying. The doctors won't say it, but I know. I can feel it." Sarah's pager buzzed again. She had to go. "I'll make it worth your while." Montgomery pulled out a checkbook from his bedside drawer. His hand shook as he opened it. "Name your price." Sarah thought of her mother's medical bills. The stack of unpaid invoices on her kitchen table. The second job she was considering taking. "This is crazy," she said. "I can't." $50,000. Montgomery's pen scratched against the check. "For 1 day of your time." Sarah's heart pounded. That kind of money would cover her mother's treatments for a year. 100,000. Montgomery tore out the check. Held it up. Tax-free. Sarah stared at the check. Her mouth went dry. "Mr. Montgomery." A knock at the door made them both jump. Sarah shoved the check into her pocket as Nancy, the night supervisor, poked her head in. "Everything okay in here?" Nancy's eyes narrowed. "Your pager's been going off." "Fine," Sarah said quickly. "Just finishing up." "Well, hurry up. Mrs. Rodriguez in 2110 needs her meds." The door closed. Sarah's hand shook as she checked Montgomery's IV line one last time. "Think about it," he whispered. "Please." Sarah walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the handle. "When?" Her voice was barely audible. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Montgomery's voice strengthened. "My lawyer will be here at 10. Sarah nodded once, not looking back. She left the room, the check burning in her pocket like a hot coal. In the bathroom, she pulled it out, stared at the number of zeros. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, tired, drawn with pain, trying to hide how much the treatments hurt. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from the pharmacy. Refill reminder for Chen, Ming. Pain medication. Balance due. $847.62. She looked in the mirror, saw the dark circles under her eyes, the worry lines starting to form. Just one day, she whispered to her reflection. She folded the check carefully, put it back in her pocket, the weight of what she'd just agreed to settle on her shoulders as she walked to Mrs. Rodriguez's room. Her steps felt heavier with each passing moment. Tomorrow would change everything. She just didn't know how much. Sarah arrived at the hospital at 8:30 am, wearing civilian clothes instead of her scrubs. Her hands felt clammy as she signed in at the visitor's desk. "Early for visiting hours," the receptionist said. "Special permission." Sarah's voice cracked. She cleared her throat. "For Montgomery in 2104. The elevator ride to the VIP floor felt longer than usual. Sarah clutched her purse, which contained a hastily assembled collection of props, old family photos, a worn diary, anything that might help sell their story. Montgomery was awake and sitting up when she entered. He'd combed his hair and put on a fresh hospital gown. "You came." His face lit up. "The check hasn't cleared yet." Sarah set her purse down. "Let's get something straight. We need rules." Montgomery nodded eagerly. Of course. One day only. No touching except what's medically necessary. And if anyone from the ethics board shows up, you're an old family friend visiting." Montgomery waved his hand. "Simple." Sarah pulled up a chair. "Tell me about her." "Jessica." Montgomery's eyes turned distant. "She loved horses. Started riding when she was 6. What was her favorite horse called?" He frowned. "I don't remember." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Her favorite color?" "Blue." "No. Purple. Single quotes." Montgomery rubbed his temples. "Maybe blue. This isn't going to work." Sarah stood up. "Your lawyer will see right through. Wait." Montgomery grabbed a leather briefcase from beside his bed. His hands trembled as he opened it. "I brought photos." He pulled out a stack of pictures. Sarah sat back down. The first photo showed a young girl with long brown hair, sitting on a horse. She was smiling, but her eyes looked sad. "That's Starlight," Montgomery said. "The horse, I remember now. She begged for him for months." Sarah studied the photo. "When was this taken?" "Her 10th birthday." Montgomery's voice softened. "The last one I was actually there for." They spent the next hour going through photos. Sarah took notes on her phone. Jessica's favorite foods, mac and cheese, but only the way their cook Maria made it. Her best friend's name, Sophie Williams, the name of her first pet, a goldfish called Bubbles. "Now you try," Montgomery said. Sarah straightened in her chair. "Try to imagine being Jessica. Remember when Maria made that mac and cheese for my 13th birthday?" Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Sophie came over and No." Montgomery shook his head. "Jessica had a slight stutter when she got excited. And she'd play with her hair, like this." he demonstrated, twirling a strand around his finger. Sarah tried again, adding the stutter and the hair twirling. Montgomery's eyes welled up. "Better," he whispered. A knock at the door made them both jump. Dr. Patterson walked in, nose buried in his tablet. "Good morning, Mr. Montgomery. How are we feeling today?" He looked up, noticed Sarah. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had a visitor." "Family friend," Sarah said quickly, standing up. "Just leaving, actually." "No, stay." Montgomery reached for her hand, stopped himself. "Please, Doctor." Patterson checked Montgomery's vitals, asked routine questions. Sarah stood awkwardly by the window, pretending to look at her phone. "Blood pressure's a bit high, Doctor," Patterson said. "Try to rest today. My lawyer's coming at 10, Montgomery said. "Important business. Make it quick, Doctor." Patterson headed for the door. "Mr. Montgomery needs his rest." As soon as the door closed, Sarah checked her watch. 9:45 a month. "We need to go over the childhood stories again," she said. Montgomery shook his head. "No time. Just remember, you're angry with me." "What?" Jessica was always angry with me. For never being there. His voice caught. That part should be easy to act. Sarah thought of her own father, who'd walked out when she was 12. The anger rose easily. "Yeah," she said. "I can do angry." At 9:55, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Sarah's heart raced. "Last chance to back out," Montgomery said. Sarah thought of her mother, of the check in her purse. Too late for that. The door opened. A man in an expensive suit walked in, carrying a leather briefcase. "Charles." He nodded at Montgomery, then looked at Sarah. "And you are?" Sarah opened her mouth. No words came out. "Jessica," Montgomery's voice cracked with emotion. "My daughter's finally come home." The lawyer's eyebrows shot up. "I wasn't aware. It's been a long time." Sarah found her voice, added the slight stutter she'd practiced. "Dad and I have a lot to catch up on." She twirled a strand of hair around her finger. Watched the lawyer's face for any sign of suspicion. "Wow." The lawyer set his briefcase on the bedside table. "This changes things. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, Richard." Montgomery tried to sit up straighter. The will, a commotion in the hallway cut him off. Raised voices, running feet. The door burst open. A young man in his 30s stood there, face red with exertion. "Uncle Charles?" His eyes locked onto Sarah. "What the hell is going on?" Sarah's blood ran cold. She'd forgotten about the nephew. Montgomery's heart monitor started beeping faster. Everything was about to fall apart. The nephew stormed into the room. His expensive suit was wrinkled, like he'd rushed straight from a red-eye flight. "Marcus." Montgomery's voice shook. "You're early. Got a call from Dr. Patterson." Marcus's eyes never left Sarah. "Said you were making changes to the will, with a woman claiming to be not claiming." Montgomery's heart monitor beeped faster. "She's Jessica." Sarah's throat went dry. She forced herself to meet Marcus's gaze. "That's impossible." Marcus pulled out his phone. "Jessica's dead. I was at her funeral." "Marcus, please." Montgomery started coughing. "Who are you?" Marcus stepped closer to Sarah. She could smell his expensive cologne. "Really?" The lawyer cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should show him." Montgomery wheezed between coughs. "The photos." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her purse. Dropped it. Photos spilled across the floor. Marcus snatched one up before she could grab it. His face went white. "Where did you get these?" His voice was deadly quiet. "They're mine," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Added the stutter she'd practiced. "From my childhood." "Bullshit." Marcus shoved the photo in her face. "This is Jessica's 10th birthday. I was there." "You weren't." Sarah glanced at the photo. Saw what she'd missed earlier. A younger Marcus in the background, wearing a party hat. The lawyer was watching everything with narrowed eyes. Marcus. Montgomery's voice was weaker now. Let me explain. No. Marcus pulled out his phone again. I'm calling security. Wait. Sarah grabbed his arm. Please, I can explain. The door opened. Nancy, the night supervisor, walked in. Everything okay in here? We could hear shouting. She stopped, stared at Sarah. What are you doing here? You're not on shift today. The lawyer's eyebrow shot up. Shift? Sarah's world started spinning. She looked at Montgomery, silently pleading for help. She works here? Marcus asked Nancy. Of course she does. She's one of our nurses. Get out. Montgomery's shout made everyone jump. The heart monitor was beeping frantically now. All of you, get out. Uncle Charles, I said out. Montgomery tried to sit up. His face was turning red. Doctor. Patterson rushed in. What's going on? Mr. Montgomery, your blood pressure. They're upsetting my daughter. Montgomery was gasping now. Daughter? Doctor. Patterson looked at Sarah. Recognition dawned on his face. Miss Chen? The room started spinning faster. Sarah backed toward the door. Security's on their way up, Nancy said from the doorway. Sarah, don't go. Montgomery's voice was desperate. Please. She ran. Behind her, she heard Marcus shout. Her name is Sarah? The elevator was too slow. She took the stairs, nearly falling in her haste. Burst out into the lobby, past the startled receptionist, into the parking lot. Her phone buzzed as she reached her car. A text from an unknown number. This is Marcus Montgomery. We need to talk. Now. She turned the phone off. Her hand shook so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. What had she done? She drove home on autopilot, parked, sat in her car staring at nothing. Her phone was full of missed calls when she turned it back on. The hospital, Montgomery's room. Marcus, a new text from Marcus. I know where you work. This isn't over. Sarah leaned her head against the steering wheel, let out a shaky breath. A knock on her car window made her scream. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door jumped back, startled. Said something through the glass. Sarah rolled down the window. You okay, honey? You've been sitting out here for an hour. Had it been that long? I'm fine. Sarah's voice sounded distant to her own ears. Just tired. Well, there's a man in a suit been asking about you. Said he's from the hospital? Sarah's heart stopped. When? Few minutes ago? Said he'd come back. Single quotes. Sarah grabbed her purse, ran for her apartment. Inside, she double-locked the door, sank down onto her couch. Her phone buzzed again. The hospital's ethics board. It was all falling apart. Another text from Marcus. Found your address. We need to discuss what happened and the will. Sarah's hand shook as she opened her purse. The check was still there. She could take it, run, start over somewhere else. Her mother's face flashed in her mind. The doorbell rang. Sarah stopped breathing. Miss Chen? Marcus's voice came through the door. We know you're in there. We? Miss Chen, this is Richard Whitman, Mr. Montgomery's lawyer. We just want to talk. Sarah pressed her hands against her ears, tried to think. Her phone buzzed. Montgomery's room number. She answered. Sarah? Montgomery's voice was weak. Come back, please. I can't. It's over. No. A pause. Heavy breathing. I'm dying, Sarah. For real this time. What? Doctor, Patterson says hours, maybe. Please, I need to fix this. Sarah looked at her door, heard Marcus and the lawyer talking outside. Why? She whispered into the phone. Why did you do this to me? Because you reminded me of her. The way you care. The way you listen. Montgomery's voice caught. I needed to pretend, just once, that I could make things right. Another knock at her door. Louder. Miss Chen, please. Memoir, Montgomery's condition is deteriorating. Sarah closed her eyes, thought of all the patients she'd watched die alone. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said into the phone. "Thank you," Montgomery's voice cracked. "And Sarah, bring the check." She hung up, walked to the door, opened it. Marcus and the liar stood there, faces grim. "We need to talk," Marcus said. Sarah straightened her spine. "Not here." "At the hospital? Why should we trust you?" "Because your uncle is dying." Sarah's voice was steady now. "And you don't want him to die alone." Marcus's face changed. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "After you," he said, gesturing to his waiting car. Sarah locked her door, followed them. Whatever happened next, there was no turning back now. The ride back to the hospital was silent. Sarah sat in the back of Marcus's BMW, watching the city blur past. Her check was still in her purse, burning a hole through the fabric. The hospital's automatic doors hissed open. Dr. Patterson met them at the elevator. "He's asking for all of you." The doctor's face was grave. "But I need to warn you, his condition has deteriorated significantly." The elevator felt smaller with 4 people in it. Sarah could feel Marcus watching her. "Before we go in," Marcus said as they reached the VIP floor, "I want to know exactly how much he's paying you." Sarah's hand tightened on her purse. "That's between your uncle and me." "Like hell it is." Marcus stepped in front of her as the elevator doors opened. "You're scamming a dying man, Marcus." The lawyer's voice was sharp. "Not here." A nurse hurried past them, carrying fresh 4 bags. Sarah recognized the look on her face, the one that meant time was running out. Montgomery's room was darker than before. The monitors cast a pale blue glow over his face. He looked smaller somehow, sunken into the white sheets. "You came back." His voice was barely a whisper. "Uncle Charles," Marcus started. "Quiet." Montgomery raised a shaking hand. "All of you, sit down, please." They found chairs. Sarah ended up closest to the bed, with Marcus directly across from her. His jaw was clenched tight. "Richard," Montgomery looked at his liar. "The papers." The liar opened his briefcase. "Charles, given the circumstances." "The papers." Montgomery's voice strengthened for a moment. Richard pulled out a stack of documents. Sarah's stomach churned. "I'm changing my will." Montgomery's breathing was labored. "Sarah will receive no." Sarah stood up. "I don't want your money." "Sit down." Montgomery grabbed her wrist. His grip was weaker than yesterday. "Please." She sat. "Marcus." Montgomery turned to his nephew. "You're angry. You're being conned, Uncle Charles." Marcus leaned forward. "She's a nurse who showed me kindness." Montgomery's monitors beeped faster. "Who listened?" "Like Jessica used to." "She's not Jessica." Marcus's voice cracked. "Jessica is dead. I was there. I saw the car. I identified her body while you were in Tokyo, closing another deal." The room went silent, except for the beeping machines. "I know." Montgomery's eyes filled with tears. "God help me. I know." Sarah tried to pull her hand away. Montgomery held on. "Sarah." He turned back to her. "Show them the check." Her hand shook as she pulled it out, passed it to Richard. The lawyer's eyebrows shot up. "Charles, this is an insult to Jessica's memory," Marcus snapped. "Shut up and listen." Montgomery started coughing. Sarah automatically reached for the water glass, helped him drink. When the coughing subsided, Montgomery continued. "I paid her to pretend, to give me one day with the daughter I never properly had." "Why?" Marcus's voice was quieter now. "Because I'm a coward." Montgomery's grip on Sarah's wrist tightened. "I couldn't face what I'd done, how I'd failed her." "Failed you both." A nurse poked her head in. "Everything okay?" "His numbers are fine," Sarah said automatically. "Just give us a minute." The nurse hesitated, then left. Richard Montgomery turned to his liar. Tear up the new will. What? Sarah and Marcus spoke at the same time. Sarah. Montgomery's eyes were clearer now. You didn't come back for the money, did you? She shook her head. Why did you come back? Sarah thought of all her terminal patients, of her own father, who'd never bothered to return. Because her voice caught. Because no one should die alone. Montgomery smiled. It transformed his whole face. Just like her single quotes, he looked at Marcus. She would have come back too. Marcus stood up abruptly, walked to the window. The money goes to Marcus, Montgomery said to Richard. All of it. But he started coughing again. Harder this time. The monitors started beeping frantically. Sarah switched back into nurse mode, reaching for the call button. No. Montgomery grabbed her hand. Not yet. Marcus. Marcus turned from the window. His face was wet. The money goes to you, Montgomery wheezed. If you use some of it for the foundation. What foundation? Marcus moved closer to the bed. The one Sarah's going to help you create. Montgomery's voice was fading. For fathers and daughters. His eyes started to close. Sarah hit the call button. The room flooded with medical staff. Out. Doctor, Patterson ordered. Everyone out. Now. In the hallway, Sarah leaned against the wall. Her legs felt weak. Marcus stood next to her. Neither spoke. Richard cleared his throat. I'll draw up the new paperwork. He hesitated. Assuming Mr. Montgomery. The door opened. Doctor. Patterson came out. He's stabilized, he said. For now. But he's asking for you both. Sarah and Marcus looked at each other. After you, Marcus said quietly. Sarah squared her shoulders. Walked back into the room. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. For Jessica. The ethics board meeting was scheduled for 9 MS Day. Sarah sat in the cold conference room, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. 3 board members faced her across the table. Dr. Wilson, the chief of medicine, Nancy, the night supervisor, and Dr. Harris, head of the ethics committee, whose face looked like it was carved from stone. Miss Chen. Doctor. Harris opened a folder. Would you like to explain why you impersonated a deceased patient's daughter? Sarah glanced at her union representative, a tired-looking woman named Janet, who'd been assigned to her case. Montgomery asked me to. We know what he asked, Doctor. Harris cut her off. We want to know why you agreed. Before Sarah could answer, the door opened. Marcus walked in. Sorry I'm late. He straightened his tie. I'm here representing my uncle's interests. Doctor. Harris frowned. This is a private disciplinary. My uncle's lawyer is on his way. Marcus sat next to Sarah. We should wait. Sarah stared at him. They hadn't spoken since yesterday, when they'd left Montgomery's room. The door opened again. Richard walked in, carrying his ever-present briefcase. Now, Marcus leaned forward. Before we continue, I should mention that my uncle has made it clear. If Sarah Chen loses her job over this, he'll pull all his donations to the hospital. The room went silent. Montgomery's wing of the hospital was named after him for a reason. Doctor. Harris's face reddened. Are you threatening us? Not at all. Marcus's voice was smooth. Just explaining the situation. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Where are you? The pharmacy won't refill without payment. Her hands started shaking again. Doctor. Wilson cleared his throat. Perhaps we could. The door burst open. A nurse rushed in. Mr. Montgomery's crashing. Sarah was on her feet before anyone could stop her. She ran for the elevator. Marcus right behind her. Code Blue, room 2104. Code Blue. The announcement echoed through the hallways as they reached Montgomery's floor. Sarah's nursing instincts took over. She pushed through the crowd of medical staff. Montgomery's face was gray. The monitor screamed. Clear, doctor. Patterson pressed the defibrillator paddles to Montgomery's chest. His body arched. Fell back. No response. Again. Sarah felt Marcus grab her hand. She squeezed back. Clear. The monitors resumed their steady beeping. Doctor. Patterson stepped back, wiping his forehead. He's back. For now. Sarah's knees went weak. She sat heavily in the bedside chair. Montgomery's eyes fluttered open. Sarah? His voice was barely audible. I'm here. Single quotes. She leaned closer. The foundation? He struggled to focus. Promise me. I promise. Marcus, right here. Uncle Charles. Montgomery's hand fumbled for Marcus's. Take care of her. She's good people. Uncle Charles. No time. Single quotes. Montgomery's breathing was labored. The ethics board. We'll handle it, Marcus said firmly. Montgomery's eyes closed. The monitors steadied. He needs rest, Doctor. Patterson said quietly. You should go back to your meeting. In the hallway, Marcus pulled out his phone. Richard, call the board members. Tell them, he looked at Sarah. Tell them we're establishing the Montgomery Foundation for Family Reconciliation. With Sarah Chen as co-director. Sarah's mouth fell open. What? It's what he wants. Marcus's voice was tired. And after everything, maybe it's what we need too. Sarah thought of her own father, of Jessica, of all the broken families she'd seen in her years of nursing. Her phone buzzed again. The pharmacy? Marcus glanced at it. We'll take care of your mother's medications too. I don't want charity. It's not charity. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. It's a job. A real one. The foundation needs someone who understands. Understands what? Loss. His voice cracked slightly. And forgiveness. The elevator dinged. The ethics board members filed out. Doctor. Harris looked grim. Miss Chen is unavailable. Marcus interrupted. She has a foundation to help run. Doctor. Wilson stepped forward. The hospital board would be very interested in partnering with such a foundation. Sarah saw what was happening. The politics. The money. The power plays. But underneath it all was Montgomery, fighting for his life. Trying to build something good from all his mistakes. I'll do it, she said quietly. Marcus nodded once. Richard will draw up the paperwork. Doctor. Harris opened his mouth. Closed it. The monitors in Montgomery's room started beeping again. Sarah turned toward the sound. Hesitated. Go, Marcus said. We'll handle the details. She ran back into the room. Montgomery's eyes were open, watching the door. His voice was weak. Everything's arranged. She took his hand. The foundation. My job. Everything. He smiled slightly. Good girl. His eyes drifted shut. Sarah sat beside him, still holding his hand. Outside, she could hear Marcus talking to the board members, making arrangements, building something new from the ashes of old mistakes. But in here, in the quiet, she just held a dying man's hand. And somewhere, she thought, Jessica would understand. The next morning hit like a freight train. Sarah sat in Montgomery's room, watching the sunrise paint the city gold. She hadn't left since the meeting with the ethics board. Coffee? Marcus appeared in the doorway, holding 2 paper cups. Thanks. Her voice was hoarse from lack of sleep. They'd spent the night taking turns sitting with Montgomery, whose condition stayed critical but stable, like he was holding on for something. Sarah, Marcus set the coffee down. We need to talk about Jessica. Her stomach tightened. What about her? He pulled out his phone, pulled up a photo, handed it to her. Sarah stared at the image. A teenage girl with long brown hair sat at a piano, laughing at something off camera. This was 2 weeks before the accident. Marcus's voice was flat. Want to know what she was laughing at? Sarah said nothing. Uncle Charles had just called. Canceled her graduation ceremony. Again, she was laughing because his voice caught. because she said she'd expected it. The monitors beeped steadily in the background. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand. Marcus took the phone back. What you did, pretending to be her, it wasn't just about the money. I know that. No, you don't. He leaned forward. You gave him something he never gave her. Time. Montgomery stirred in his sleep. They both went quiet until his breathing steadied. I found this in his briefcase. Marcus pulled out a worn envelope. It's addressed to Jessica. Never sent. Sarah's hands shook as she took it. Read it, Marcus said. Please. She opened the envelope carefully. The paper was expensive, but crumpled like it had been handled many times. My dearest Jessica, she read aloud. By the time you read this, I'll probably be in Dubai or Singapore, or some other place that isn't where I should be, with you. Montgomery's monitors beeped faster. Sarah paused, but his eyes stayed closed. I tell myself it's all for you. The empire I'm building, the legacy I'll leave. But that's a lie. The truth is, I'm a coward. Every time I see you, I see your mother and my failures. It's easier to run than to face what I've done. Sarah's voice cracked. She looked at Marcus. Keep going, he said quietly. The day you were born, I promised to protect you. Instead, I protected myself from love, from responsibility, from the terrifying reality that someone so perfect could depend on someone so flawed. The door opened. Doctor Patterson walked in, checked the monitors. How's he doing? Sarah asked, holding on. The doctor's voice was gentle. But you should finish whatever needs to be done. After he left, Sarah continued reading. I'm writing this from Tokyo. Another deal. Another excuse. Your graduation is tomorrow. I should be there. I won't be. Someday, I hope you'll understand. No, that's another lie. I hope you never understand how a father could choose anything over his child. Montgomery's breathing changed. Sarah looked up. His eyes were open, watching her. Keep reading, he whispered. Sarah's hands trembled. The truth is, Jessica, I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve your love. But I want you to know, every success, every deal, every building with my name on it, they're all hollow victories. Because the greatest thing I ever did was help create you. And my greatest failure was not being there to watch you become who you are. Tears fell onto the paper. Sarah wasn't sure if they were hers or Montgomery's. I love you, Jessica. I always have. I'm just sorry. I never learned how to show it. You're a coward of a father, Charles. The room went quiet, except for the monitors. When did you write this? Marcus asked. The night before. Montgomery's voice was weak. The accident. Never sent it. Sarah carefully folded the letter, put it back in the envelope. Sarah. Montgomery reached for her hand. I need you to do something. Anything. The foundation. He gripped her hand tighter. Help them. The fathers like me. Before it's too late. I will. And Sarah. His eyes locked onto hers. Call your father. She jerked back like she'd been burned. What? Marcus told me. He left when you were 12. Montgomery's breathing was labored. Don't wait until it's too late. That's different. He chose to, so did I. Montgomery started coughing. We all make choices. Bad ones. Stupid ones. Marcus helped him sip some water. The foundation, Montgomery continued. It's not just for fathers to find their way back. It's for daughters too. Sarah thought of her father. The years of anger. The birthdays with no cards. The graduations with an empty seat. I can't, she whispered. You can. Montgomery squeezed her hand. You will. His eyes started to close. The letter, he mumbled. Keep it. Show it to them. The ones who come to the foundation. I will, Sarah promised. Good. His voice was fading. Marcus, I'm here. Uncle Charles. Take care of each other. His grip on Sarah's hand weakened. Build something better. The monitors started beeping erratically. Sarah reached for the call button, but Montgomery shook his head. No. His eyes opened one last time. Just stay. So they stayed. Sarah on one side, Marcus on the other, holding his hands as the monitors slowed. Outside, the city woke up. Traffic noise filtered through the windows. The sun climbed higher, and in room 2104, 3 broken people sat together, trying to piece something whole from the fragments of their lives. The letter sat between them, a bridge across the years of silence. A beginning. Charles Montgomery died at 9:47 a Tuesday morning. Sarah watched the doctors call it, their voices distant and professional. Time of death. Cause of death. Forms to be filled out. Marcus stood by the window, his back straight, his face unreadable. Miss Chen, doctor. Patterson touched her shoulder. You should go home. Get some rest. She nodded, not moving. Her hand still felt warm where Montgomery had held it. The room emptied slowly. Nurses disconnecting monitors. Orderlies waiting respectfully. The quiet efficiency of a hospital dealing with death. I'll handle the arrangements, Marcus said finally. His voice was rough. Sarah stood up. Her legs felt wooden. The foundation later. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. Just later, she picked up her purse. The letter was still inside, heavy as lead. In the hallway, Nancy caught up with her. The ethics board wants to meet. Tomorrow morning. Sarah nodded again. Everything felt distant, like she was watching it happen to someone else. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Where are you? Haven't heard from you in days. Reality crashed back in. Her mother, the medications, the bills. She turned back to Montgomery's room. Marcus was on the phone, probably with the funeral home. The foundation would take time to set up, time her mother didn't have. Her phone buzzed again. An unknown number. She answered without thinking. Hello? Is this Sarah Chen? She recognized the voice. Hadn't heard it in 16 years. Dad? Marcus looked up sharply. I saw your name in the paper. Her father's voice was older, rougher. Something about a foundation? With Charles Montgomery? Sarah's hand started shaking. How did you get this number? Your mother. A pause. We still talk sometimes. The world tilted sideways. Her mother had never mentioned it. Sarah? Marcus was watching her with concern. I have to go, she told her father. Wait. She hung up. Marcus stepped into the hallway. Everything okay? No. Her voice cracked. Nothing's okay. He looked at his watch. Come on, I'll buy you breakfast. They ended up in the hospital cafeteria. Sarah stared at her untouched coffee. He left when I was 12, she said finally. No goodbye. No explanation. Marcus waited. Mom got sick 2 years later. Cancer. First time, she beat it. Second time, Sarah's hand wrapped around the coffee cup. He never called, never helped, and now? Now, he reads about me in the paper and suddenly wants to talk. She laughed bitterly. Because I'm connected to Charles Montgomery. Maybe. Marcus stirred his own coffee. Or maybe because he saw a story about a foundation for family reconciliation. Sarah closed her eyes. Remember Montgomery's last words. I can't. Can't what? Forgive him. She opened her eyes. Like you forgave your uncle. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I haven't, he said finally. Not completely. But I'm trying. He pulled out his phone. Showed her another photo. Jessica again. Younger this time. Maybe 7 or 8. Standing between Montgomery and a younger Marcus at some formal event. She always believed people could change. Marcus's voice was soft. Even Uncle Charles. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Her father. What do I do? You know what Uncle Charles would say. She did. The letter in her purse seemed to burn. The foundation will need someone who understands. Marcus finished his coffee. Really understands. Sarah looked at her phone. At the missed call notification. I'm scared, she whispered. Good. Marcus stood up. Use it. Help other people who are scared too. The cafeteria was filling up. Morning shift nurses grabbing quick breakfasts. Doctors discussing cases. Life going on. Sarah pulled out her phone. What are you doing? Choosing. She dialed her father's number. It rang once, twice. Sarah? His voice was hopeful, terrified. She thought of Montgomery, of Jessica, of 16 years of silence. We need to talk, she said. Marcus squeezed her shoulder as he left. Sarah sat in the hospital cafeteria, phone pressed to her ear, taking the first step on a very long road. Yes, her father said. We do. Outside, the sun broke through the morning clouds. In her purse, Montgomery's letter waited, a guide for the journey ahead. Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak. The Montgomery Foundation opened its doors 3 months later, a modest office on the hospital's ground floor with a simple plaque by the door. For second chances. Sarah sat at her desk, reviewing applications. Each one told a similar story: regret, fear, hope. A knock at her door made her look up. Marcus stood there, holding a framed photo. Last piece of decoration, he said. Sarah knew which photo it was before he hung it. Jessica at her piano, laughing at her father's phone call, a reminder of why they were here. First clients coming today? Marcus straightened the frame. Sarah nodded, picked up a file. Robert Chen. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Relation? My father. The room went quiet. Their first meeting, 3 months ago at a coffee shop, had been awkward. Painful? Short. You sure about this? Marcus asked. Sarah looked at Montgomery's letter, now framed on her wall. He's the reason I understand. She checked her watch. He'll be here in 10 minutes. Marcus sat down. Want me to stay? No. She managed a small smile. But thanks. After he left, Sarah read through her father's application again. Reason for seeking assistance. To understand how to make amends. To learn if forgiveness is possible. Her hand shook slightly. Another knock. Nancy, the night supervisor, poked her head in. Your 9 o'clock is here. Sarah stood up, smoothed her skirt. The man who walked in was older than she remembered. Grayer, smaller. Sarah, his voice cracked. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Mark Chen, professional. Distant. Safe. Please sit. He sat. His hands twisted in his lap. I've reviewed your application. She kept her voice steady. But I'd like to hear, in your own words, why you're here. He pulled out a wrinkled newspaper clipping. The article about the foundation's opening. Because of this, he said. Because you're helping people like me. People like you? Cowards. His voice broke. People who ran away from the best things in their lives. Sarah's chest tightened. She thought of Montgomery's words. I'm a coward. Why now? She asked. After 16 years? He looked at Jessica's photo on the wall. Because I'm sick, he said quietly. Sarah's heart stopped. What? Cancer. He met her eyes. Like your mother's. Stage 4. The room spun slightly. How long? 6 months. Maybe less. He tried to smile. Karma, right? Sarah stood up abruptly, walked to the window. Outside, hospital life continued. Ambulances, patients, families. Does Mom know? Not yet. She heard him shift in his chair. I wanted to tell you first. Why? Because his voice caught. Because I didn't want to die like Montgomery, with letters I never sent. Sarah turned around. Her father looked small in the chair, scared, like her patients when they got bad news. She walked back to her desk. pulled out Montgomery's letter. "Read this," she said. He took it with trembling hands. As he read, tears fell onto the paper, just like they had in room 2104. "I could have written this," he whispered when he finished. "But you didn't." "No." He wiped his eyes. "I'm here instead." Sarah looked at Jessica's photo, at the plaque by the door. For second chances, she opened her drawer, pulled out another form. "This is a contract," she said. "For foundation services," her father took it. "Read it slowly. Weekly meetings," she continued. "Family counseling. Medical support coordination." "Sarah, you'll need to tell Mom." Her voice shook slightly. "Everything." "And I mean everything," he nodded. "And understand, this isn't forgiveness." "Not yet. I know. It's a chance." She picked up a pen. "That's all." He signed the paper. His hand shook so badly, the signature was barely legible. Sarah signed her part. Professional, official, client and counselor. Father and daughter. Both. A knock at the door. Marcus again. "Sorry to interrupt." He looked between them. "The hospital board is ready." Sarah stood up. "Same time next week," she told her father. He got up slowly, like it hurt. "Sarah." She paused at the door. "Thank you." His voice cracked. "For being better than me." She thought of Montgomery, of Jessica, of chances lost and found. "Next week," she said again. In the hallway, Marcus waited. "You okay?" Sarah straightened her shoulders. "Ask me next week." They walked to the board meeting together. Behind them, in the small office with the simple plaque, a father sat alone, reading a letter about forgiveness, learning how to write his own. 6 months later, Sarah stood in room 2104. New patient, new family, same pain. "He's asking for you again," the nurse said softly. Sarah nodded, squared her shoulders. Robert Chen lay in Montgomery's old bed, thin and gray against the white sheets. 5 months, 2 weeks, 4 days. That's how long they'd had for their weekly meetings. Not enough time. Never enough. "Sarah," his voice was weak, like Montgomery's at the end. She sat in the chair she'd occupied half a year ago. "The foundation board meeting went well," she said. "Marcus sends his regards." Her father smiled slightly. "How many families now?" 57. She took his hand, felt the bones under paper-thin skin. 3 success stories this week. Tell me." So she did. About the CEO who quit his job to spend time with his teenage daughter. The mother who finally answered her son's letters from prison. The grandfather who learned to say, "I'm sorry." Her father listened, eyes closed, smiling slightly. A knock at the door. Her mother walked in, carrying coffee. "The nurses said visiting hours are almost over," she said. Sarah checked her watch, stood up. "Same time tomorrow?" Her father opened his eyes. "Sarah." His voice strengthened slightly. "Read it to me again." She knew which letter he meant. Not Montgomery's. She pulled out the warm paper from her purse. The one he'd written in their 3rd week of counseling. "Dear Sarah," she read. "I'm writing this from your foundation office. The same office where you gave me a second chance." Her mother sat on the other side of the bed, took his other hand. "I spent 16 years running from my mistakes, from the pain I caused, from the love I was too scared to accept." The monitors beeped steadily, like a metronome for her words. "But sitting here, watching you help other lost souls find their way home, I finally understand. It's never too late to change. Never too late to try." Her voice caught. She felt her father squeeze her hand. "Keep going," he whispered. "The cancer is a wake-up call. A cruel one, but maybe one I deserved. It showed me what Montgomery learned too late. That time is the only thing we can't earn back." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the room in golden light. "I don't ask for forgiveness. I haven't earned it yet. But these past weeks, watching you work, seeing your strength, your compassion. I've never been more proud or more ashamed. Her mother was crying silently. You asked me once why I left. The truth is, I left because I was afraid. Afraid of failing you. Afraid of not being the father you deserved. So I chose to be no father at all. The monitors slowed slightly. But you, my brave, beautiful daughter, you chose differently. You took your pain and turned it into purpose. Your anger into action. Sarah wiped her eyes, kept reading. The foundation you built, it's not just about second chances. It's about courage. The courage to face our mistakes. To try again. To love despite the risk of loss. Her father's breathing was shallower now. I don't know how much time I have left. But I promise you this, every day, every moment, I'll try to be worthy of the chance you gave me. The chance to be your father again? The room was quiet, except for the monitors and her voice. I love you, Sarah. I always have. Even when I was too much of a coward to show it. Love, Dad. She folded the letter carefully. Sarah? Her father's voice was barely a whisper. Yes? Thank you. His eyes met hers, clear and bright. For showing me how to come home. The monitors started slowing. Sarah looked at her mother, saw 16 years of pain and love in her eyes. I'll get the nurse, her mother said, standing. No, her father's voice was peaceful. Just stay, both of you. So they stayed, like she had with Montgomery, like Jessica couldn't with her father. The sun set. The city lights came on. In room 2104, a family sat together. Broken pieces made whole again, just in time. Later, after it was over, Sarah stood in her foundation office. Marcus found her there, staring at Jessica's photo. I heard, he said simply. Sarah nodded. We did good work, she said. These past months, you did good work. She touched the frame of her father's letter, now hanging next to Montgomery's. Think they'd be proud? She asked. Jessica and Charles? Marcus smiled slightly. I think they are. Sarah looked at her desk, at the files of families waiting for their chance. Tomorrow, she'd help another father find his way home. Another daughter learn to forgive. Another family heal. But tonight she'd remember. 2 letters, 2 fathers, and one foundation built on the hope that it's never too late to change. Never too late to come home. Never too late to love. She turned off the office light, stepped out into the hospital corridor. Behind her, the plaque caught the evening light. For second chances. For all of them. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to support us by leaving a like and subscribing to our Slices of Life channel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which city are you talking about? It's very rewarding for us to provide our followers with an enjoyable moment. We appreciate the unconditional support you show us in every story. Blessings!